the end result, so to speak, is the self-love triangle, which we can talk to second. But how we first get there, just dialoguing with these parts, we need to have self-access. And so many people try to work on their inner critic or tune into their shame or work on procrastination or perfectionism from just other managing parts, and it doesn't work.
Going Inside is a podcast on a mission to help people heal from trauma and reconnect with their authentic self. Join me, trauma therapist John Clark, for guest interviews, real-life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Whether you're navigating your own trauma, helping others heal from trauma, or simply yearning for a deeper understanding of yourself, Going Inside is your companion on the path to healing and self-discovery. Download free guided meditations and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. All right, excited to introduce my guests for today. I'm always excited when I have multiple guests, and in this case, authors of a new book that just came out last week, Transforming the Shame Triangle, From Shame to Love Using Parts Work. Jessica, Fern, and David Cooley, thank you all so much for being here. And I wondered if I could just have each of you kind of introduce yourselves and talk a bit about your story and your background, and especially as it relates to this book. And then we'll get into what the book is about and some of the core concepts. So, yeah, Jessica, you were here not long ago. Maybe we'll start with you and and then go to David.
Yeah, great. So people might have listened to our episode, but I've been on before. I'm a therapist and an author, and you interviewed me about polysecure. And then that was a book about trauma and non-monogamy and attachment theory. And then Dave and I wrote Polywise together. And then this is our newest book, which is not about relationships between external people, but the internal parts dynamic.
Great.
Yeah, I'm David Cooley, and as Jessica said, the co-author of her second book. My first book was Polywise, and I'm a restorative justice facilitator by trade. And what I've done is sort of created my own model of restorative work for intimate partnerships. And so facilitating a space for clients that come to me with interpersonal issues and really applying that restorative lens to that process.
Mhm. Wonderful. I'm very
And
curious how go ahead, Jessica.
I was going to say it might be nice to say our relationship to each other as well, because it's a unique one. We met back in 2002 at massage school in California. Neither of us do massage anymore.
Oh,
But we have been married. We have a son together. We got divorced, and we co-author books together and are sort of creative professional partners and still live in a family raising our son. Yeah, so we've had many iterations over these last 23 years.
yeah. Well, the therapist in me has to ask, what was it like to write this book together, considering all these iterations of your own relationship with one another?
Yeah, I think because it's our second book written together, we've gotten into a stride. We've learned a lot about each other and how we work. But I think one of the strongest elements of our relationship has always been sort of the intellectual, and we really stimulate each other a lot. And it's a place that we love to connect. Language is both really important to both of us. And yeah, I think being excited about ideas because there's so much crossover in the work that we do in the world, it just feels like a really fluid and relatively easy process. You know, writing a
Mm.
book's not easy, but working together and collaborating really feels pretty harmonious.
Yeah, even when we hit bumps, like one of us is struggling with something or struggling to access a certain voice that we want for a certain section. Dave shares a story in the book about struggling with sort of biographical parts of the book, and so there's a real support that's there too because of what our relationship is and has been, where we can actually you know help be coaches and therapists to each other to work through it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Tell me about, the inspiration for this book.
Yeah, this inspiration really came from an idea that Jessica had, that's born out of, again, our respective work. But she came to me and was suggesting this as a real sort of clarity that she was distilling in her work with clients, specifically doing parts work, and seeing how there was this real constellation of parts working in conjunction with shame. That when work was stalling out, it wasn't just one part. There was always this influence that was influencing the way that shame showed up. And when she started to recognize the interplay between the inner critic, shame, and these escaper parts, which we'll elaborate a little bit more on in just a moment, it really felt like the linchpin or the cornerstone of a lot of places where people have problems moving forward in their own work. So when she started to talk to me about it, I was already thinking about shame as one of the big obstacles to people doing repair work successfully. So much of what really hinders people getting into a state of accountability or vulnerability is shame. And I was really wanting something specific and detailed to help people get through their own shame before then being able to really hold space for the feedback around impact of behavior in their interpersonal relationships, especially when there's an attachment based relationship at play. So for me, it was a no brainer. When she was naming it with this level of specificity, it felt really inspired. And as we talked about it and developed the idea more, it just became, yeah, a really exciting possibility.
Wonderful. Yeah, maybe you all can, set things up a bit here with, so chapter 1 is the drama triangle, and then chapter 2, you get into the shame triangle, and I thought those were both very concrete ways of, uh, illustrating shame and how it
Mhm.
happens and kind of the underpinnings of it, which helps us to kind of zoom out and go, what is this thing that I'm feeling or this thing that happens in therapy or when my partner says, hey, can we talk? Or your boss says, hey, can we talk? Or I have some feedback for you. Or why the hell do you always load the dishwasher that way? Or whatever. So yeah, maybe you all can unpack those kind of core concepts a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start with a drama triangle. And, I
Okay.
love that lead in because I think you're talking about the way that we're primed to have a negative or painful or adversarial response to
Yeah.
something that's really an important moment between people,
Yeah.
right? I'm wanting to give you feedback about something that's not working in our relationship. And what unfortunately we're conditioned to do is respond in a way that sets us up for failure. Right. And so if we think about the drama triangle, for me, doing conflict work, this is one of the most efficient, elegant, I think accurate models to describe the way that we fall into these kind of preset patterns with people when things feel hard interrelationally. And essentially what happens is, two or more people fall into one or three roles. There's someone who's labeled kind of stuck in the role of perpetrator, right? The person who's done quote unquote wrong or harm. Then there's the person who's the victim of that. And that's the role who's subject to the wrongdoer. And then the person who swoops in, even if it's just another part of ourselves, the rescuer, right? Who comes and tries to fix in a very codependent way the situation, by either scolding or chiding the perpetrator and trying to quote unquote save the victim. And so neither point along this triangle is really a successful place to start conflict resolution. And so we're really wanting to make ourselves aware if we're in one of these roles, we need to figure out how do we step out of that and come into a more empowered relationship to the dynamic. Right. And so that leads us into the shame triangle, which is an internalized version essentially of this drama triangle model.
Yeah, and that's what I was cueing into. I love the drama triangle. I have a degree in conflict resolution, so it was coming through a lot there. But when I was working with couples, it was like, oh, this is not just what we think of as big conflicts on the international stage. This is how you load the dishwasher kind of content, or the way that we bicker or snap or try to rescue our each other and overfunction,
Yeah.
underfunction, all of that. Um, But then working with people more individually, seeing that what would kept getting in the way was this internalized drama triangle. So we have that persecutor, which internalizes the inner critic. So that's that voice we have in our heads that's beating ourselves up and saying, "What's wrong with you? How could you? You shouldn't have."
Yep.
You know, and it's usually in second person, which is interesting. It's pointing the finger, you know.
Yeah.
And then our inner victim is what we're calling shame or shame parts, shame with a capital S. Not just the feeling, but a part of shame is this part that hears the inner critic and says, "You're right. I am broken. I'm not enough, or I'm too
Yep.
much. There's something wrong with me." So it's a first person totalizing, essentializing of who we fundamentally are, not the behaviors I just did, but who I'm fundamentally
Yep.
am
Yep.
flawed or unworthy.
Yep.
And just that dynamic's enough to feel really intense inside. And so our rescuers are our escapers, which are usually several different parts of us that want to kind of mute the inner critic and stop the feelings of shame and
Yeah.
deflation. And we can do that in different ways like overfunctioning, perfecting, over caretaking, achieving, or we can do it through underfunctioning, zoning out, scrolling too much, streaming too much, or we can do it through being aggressive, whether that's to ourselves, like self harm, or aggressive to others, where we become that persecutor, outer critic now onto someone else so that I don't have to hear my own inner critic. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. You know, coming from, in my case, a psychology background, I think about how we got here and understanding things like conflict or defensiveness, or even the Freudian idea of like an ego defense. And if we are
Mhm.
defensive, like who or what are we defending? And of course, now I operate like primarily from an IFS perspective. So I have, kind of a new version of that. But even if you get into a conversation where you can see that your opinion is about to be challenged, something changes, right? And we kind of get ready for that. And sometimes, and not to mention just the state of, I don't know, being alive in 2025 right now, like a lot of our parts are very quick to go there and go, I'm about to be challenged. In other words, I'm about to be seen as wrong or dumb or less than or whatever. And it's off to the races, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you're signaling too that, we address in the book and that feels really foundational in the work that I'm doing with clients is cueing people into the way that as human beings, we have nervous systems, and those nervous systems are constantly scanning our
Yeah.
interrelational environment for threats. And so these threats to opinions, right, are essentially threats to ego register in our organism as if they were literal survival threats.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
right.
think we're still learning how to sensitize ourselves to that. Um, so I think there's a way in which
Yeah.
it can't be overstated that influence of the nervous system on the way that we respond to even just emotional, intellectual conflict.
Yeah, we demonize our feelings and, um, there's a lot we go to great lengths to avoid the physiological experience of a feeling, whether it's social anxiety at a party. It's like, is it the party that I'm avoiding? Is it really the physiological experience of I'm feeling nervous and someone might notice I'm nervous, right? In the case of shame, or I often look at guilt and shame together. Guilt, like I did something bad; shame, like I am bad and my badness is being witnessed. Um, but a lot of times when clients are grappling with their guilt, um, I don't know. I think there's often just a lot of value in kind of going toward that guilt. Like if I really did something wrong, it could be very valuable to learn from that, right? Or even like I think about this as like a father of young children. Like it's not always bad to sit in that a little bit and go, yeah, you're feeling really bad about that thing you did, right? And that feeling is not necessarily something to be rescued from, right? And yet a
Exactly.
lot of us do that, whether it's with our kids or in this case, like talking a lot about our partners and our relationships. Yeah,
Yeah, and the trick to do that is it has to feel safe enough to be with
that's
that
right.
physiological experience, and so it's so much depends on how we're socialized to relate to our own physiological responses to these things.
Yeah, and developmentally, many of us, even though we're biological adults or chronological adults, we didn't developmentally have that experience of
Yeah.
the emotion being allowed and just accepted. So we don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
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 My experience is that a lot of times in a, when I'm working with like an adult client and they're talking about their partner, oftentimes both partners feel like they are the problematic one.
Mhm.
They're, like, equally blinded by that piece or that they feel they are more of, like, a burden to the other, and sometimes bringing that piece into the open, they're, like, shocked, like, "No, I'm the problem child," so I'm curious how you all make sense of that, especially given this piece because I know you all talk about, yeah, shame triangle and origins, which is really interesting here.
Yeah, well, I think in some ways you're talking about, like, competing shame parts. My
Yeah,
part my shame part is competitive with yours.
yep,
Right. Yeah, which in that case, that pairing will think we're both the problem. I think a lot of times, though, the pairing I also see is you have someone who is more anchored in their shame part and someone who's more in their critical parts, and so it's, "You're the problem," and the other one's like, "You're right, I am the problem." And there's that dynamic, which is also really difficult.
Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah. And
David.
I think one of the signature features of the shame part, as we're defining it within the sort of model that we're proposing with this book, is that it's really the spinner of stories. The inner critic is really sort of just labeling the behavior and making an assignment of this is what the problem is. But it's that internalization of a story about who we are and what's fundamentally true. And what I see is, I think you're rightly highlighting that for a lot of people, that's kind of one of the most terrifying or repugnant stories that we can imagine being true in a relationship, that I'm the one who's really the problem
Yeah,
here. And if we
yeah,
see that and that becomes exposed, right, it's kind of an unbearable possibility.
yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jessica.
and it feels like it's our own. Like you were saying, these 2 people who each think they're the problem, but the origins of this, the shame triangle is more of a byproduct of some combination of either our direct experiences with people actually criticizing us, whether that's overt or the subtle ways that people can sculpt child behavior. But then the culture and society we live in that just very simply tells us certain people are better and certain people aren't, certain people are worthy and certain people aren't.
Yeah.
And we learn that really quickly.
Well, yeah, absolutely, right, and again, thinking about I'm thinking all the time, of course, about my own kids and how, everything they're doing, especially when they're really little, which mine are, is like an experiment. Like, does this thing that I do get me more love and connection or less?
Mhm.
Right? And I just see adults as no different, right? Everything is either like bids for connection or coming from parts that fear losing connection. Whether it's I'm going to be more shiny in my career and then I'll get the love and keep the love, right? And yeah, they also like we have extreme polarities in that, right? You might have like this really overachieving part and then also this really active firefighter or whatever who also has to kind of like douse the flames when they're too much, right? Or when again my badness gets witnessed, whether it's by my boss or my partner or my whomever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the tragedy of the shame triangle, especially with these escaper parts that like they might be doing great things in the world or they might be wonderful caretakers or high achievers or busy bees that get stuff done, very attentive. And yet it can still actually be a survival strategy that's not fully authentic and not fully actually
Mhm.
embodied and, self-led.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of an interesting point that you were making earlier about, kids in that experimental phase of figuring out what's going to give me a sense of safety and connection relationally. And it really begs the question for me is, what is authentic experience then, right? Other than a strategy. right? To
Yeah,
get a need met, an attachment, essentially an attachment need met.
that's right.
And so for me, it's a really compelling journey to start to develop a sense of self that lives kind of beyond just those, can I get these needs met through this particular strategy? So many of the strategies are shaped by what society says is acceptable or sort of what is going to get that need met to feel safe, secure, to feel good about yourself. But what's beyond that?
Yeah.
I think this is really where IFS gets super exciting to me, is inviting people into this new relationship with a facet of being that potentially has never come onto the radar.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe we can talk more about that piece because, well, first of all, the book is very thorough, and there's pieces that are both, like, very kind of technical, which I love, but also very personal, and you all, are quite, yeah, vivid with your own, like, personal illustrations, which I really appreciate. But of course, when you set up kind of like, what is the problem? Uh, Also people are like, "Okay, now help me fix the
Right,
problem."
what's the solution?
What's the solution? Yeah, exactly. So, maybe talk we can talk more about that piece because you offer lots of, ways to work with shame.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it in 2 ways. The end result, so to speak, is the self-love triangle, which we can talk to second. But how we first get there, just dialoguing with these parts, we need to have self-access. You know, and so many people try to work on their inner critic or tune into their shame or work on procrastination or perfectionism from just other managing parts, and it doesn't work.
Yeah,
And we kind of really do need like big self to have the strength to hold this shame triangle because it's so powerful. So I'm very proud. We have 2 chapters in the book on self because
yeah,
we're like, this is one of the hardest things for people and clients, right? It's like the most important thing. And yet it can be so hard just to talk about what is self
yeah,
and then how for people to access it. So one chapter is just devoted more in the traditional IFS way of here's what it is, and here's I think like 15 exercises to to work with it, to experience it, to play with parts.
yeah.
And then
W
yeah.
one that you offered in there, which I love, is around externalizing shame because part of why it feels like too much is because it's too close. We're
Yeah.
so in it, and in my experience, when we are having that fight with our partner or whomever, a friend or whomever, a sibling, we're in it, and we're in it in an instant, right? And a lot of times just the basic awareness, which you all talk about awareness as one of the solutions or like one a path on the path, um, of working with shame is like noticing what it feels like when I'm blended with that shame part or one of these parts or a multitude of these parts, right? All of a sudden, if I'm like looking at that person and things are feeling kind of like foggy, right? Or tense, or my stomach is going like this, right? It's like, it's a pretty good, indicator for me that I might be blended. So I work with clients a lot around just that basic mind-body connection, which you all talk a lot about, and just noticing, and sometimes just noticing and letting that part know that you are here and can lead or can be the adult, self in this, conversation or this meeting with your boss. Sometimes the parts will unblend just from that, just noticing and, like, letting the part know, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we're really excited in terms of illustrating the self and helping nuance really what does that look like. As you said, the
Yeah.
chapter on self-centered model, helping people because everyone I think relates to their own experience from these different centers differently. You know, some people really have more connection or sense of identity through the mind. Other people have a lot of connection
Right.
to feelings and needs, but not so much to the somatic experience, you know? And so we're really wanting to give people this multi-tiered way of feeling into, how do parts function? How do they operate? And what do each of those centers look like when you're really grounded in self energy?
Yeah.
How do things shift in a very embodied experiential way versus just an intellectual exercise?
Maybe we can go back a second. I meant to ask this because I'm personally very and professionally very interested in inner critics. And I
Mhm.
think an inner critic is often like one of the easiest kind of parts to get to know when you're introducing someone to a parts model, right?
Yeah.
Or like that voice that's like, dude, you suck and your podcast sucks and no one's gonna
Right.
listen. It's like, okay, man, yeah, I hear you. That could happen and that could mean loss of love and connection. It's like we're pretty aware of that one, right? And like uh but you all talk about, yeah, the inner critic. And so I guess my question is, why and how is inner critic like such an integral player in this triangle and in this kind of dance of shame? And why is it important to get to know the kind of origin story of the critical parts?
Yeah, any of the parts can kick off the triangle, but it's usually the inner critic that is the one that is the loudest, that we like you said, we all kind of know if you're just wanna be general about parts work, people nod their head very quickly when you start to talk about that specific voice, so it really, so far, seems like a pretty universal archetypal voice and experience that we have, and it's so damaging to be an inner bully.
Yeah,
To speak to us that ourselves that way. So since it usually is the one starting, what I found is that if we don't work with that one to start with, it just doesn't give shame any space to breathe,
right.
right? And the escapers are really doing their behaviors to stop the inner critic in the first place.
Yep.
Yeah, or to stop obviously if there's outer criticism in our life that we're experiencing too. But
Yeah, and I think it's one of the easiest parts to link to its source and help people conceptually recognize, oh, this is actually isn't something indicative or innate in you. This isn't something that actually reflects your identity or your personality. You can really hear the way that this is a social construct that we've internalized. And so that's one of the things that we're really wanting people to understand is divesting yourself of a sense of responsibility for these parts and their activity is really powerful. And recognizing that as a self, as an individual, you are really the intersection of all of these narratives, just these concentric circles of meaning that we're swimming in constantly, like family, community, peer group, society at large, right? There's so many ways that these messagings about what's wrong with us, quote unquote, or how we should be different fundamentally are just being, we're just inundated constantly with these messages. So I think it
Yeah.
helps people start to make that link between, oh, that is something that I've heard. I see where that comes from. And now I can start to externalize it with more and more consistency.
Hmm. Yeah. How am I not enough, um, or less deserving of love and connection? You could boil a lot down to that. I had yeah, someone I was working with earlier today. They were talking about how um this thing is happening where I take on too much in life, and then I, like, have to tell people no or tell them I
mm,
can't hang out with you. And then the person was like, "I hate that I'm doing that again," right? "I hate that I'm in that cycle again." And th my question was, what do you fear it means that you're in this cycle again, right?
mm,
Because it's the same thing if I'm working with a client who has relapsed, and if their goal is to, like, be sober, whatever that means to them, I'm less concerned, at least initially, about the fact that they relapsed and more about the story they have around it, and shame and addiction go hand in hand. I mean, it's just
yeah.
deeply, deeply rooted and insidious, right? And so, same thing if my client's like, "My goal is to go to the gym more." And it's like, "Hey, okay, how did it go last week?" And if they didn't go well, right? I'm very interested to hear what that brings up, right? What's the story they have around the fact that they didn't go to the gym this week or whatever? Because that story is often like this insidious, cycle that they're in of taking them further into shame, which means they're less likely to try again or hit the reset button or go, "Oops, oh yeah, I'm in that thing again," or I take on too much. So I have to set something aside. Like, yeah, I'm doing that thing again. Oops, there I'm biting my nails again. Yeah, and I'm trying to work on biting them less. Just notice that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. There's a section in the book where we're really talking about how do parts organize their logic. right? One of the ways to identify and strengthen or sensitize our perception of the way that parts work in us is to identify how they think, how they organize thought and stories and beliefs. One of the categories is black and white, all or nothing, right? So it's really interesting to think about human life in terms of success and failure, right? And our own well-being, right? I either did or didn't do the behavior, and if I didn't, then I'm a failure. And so
Yeah,
it's the way that we've internalized that dualism,
yeah,
and then it's such a rigid measure against
yeah,
which, right, our self-worth is put against. And it's if we can see that for what it is, we can start to expand our sense of what does well-being really mean to me? How does it
yeah,
sort of go beyond just that collapsed narrative of duality? But if we're stuck
yeah.
there, it's hard to get another perspective.
We do have a need to put things into the binary, and I think some of that is, like, an evolutionary thing of, like, is this a threat or a friend? But
Mhm.
even again, like, my five-year-old, if she's watching a movie, the first thing she wants to know is, like, "Is this a good guy or a bad guy?"
Mhm. The
And
drama
we're kind of
triangle.
this the drama triangle, right? We're kind of the same way, again, with, like, whoever in our lives is like, "Is
Yeah.
this person bad or good?" Right? Are they
Friend or
for me or
foe.
against me? Yeah, friend or foe. And then we're just in that battle, both in this case, internally and externally, right? It's like, how open should I be? How open should my heart be to this person?
Yeah, and that way we have, like, we're still an amoeba nervous system that just does, like, move towards or moves away, like, expands or contracts.
Yeah,
Well, I think there's also something in that for us, we really see this work as a genuine path towards deepening and expanding human consciousness. And I think you're right in the sense that there's been an evolutionary preset for our species to survive, in that friend or foe was necessary shorthand for a long time for our survival. And now it seems like we're being invited to move beyond that, that's now not enough and could actually be a deterrent to our continued sustainability. And we need to learn how to work with the uncertainty of gray area,
yeah,
right? Not have this sort of it's this or that thinking to really get to where we need to be.
mhm.
And so to me, that's a really compelling thing that I see, because a lot of times it's easy to just fall into superlative thinking. I see this a ton in conflict.
Yeah,
You always, you never, or I
always,
always,
yeah,
I
yeah,
never, right? And that's a dead giveaway or red flag. Oh, a part's active, right? My thinking's going back to these categorical
yeah,
limited frames. I'm probably in a part.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, zooming way out and going, I really do think, like, our dwindling ability to be in nuance with one another and
Mhm.
to have different opinions, whether it's about politics or how you loaded the dishwasher, that is, like, at risk of going extinct, and it's so much easier and more fun and efficient just to see something on Instagram and go, "That person is bad."
Mm.
And that's it. And it feels really comfortable for whatever reason, for many reasons, to just arrive at some conclusion and go, "That person's bad. They always do this," right? Or, "My partner always does this thing." Um, and I just think it's incredibly insidious and dangerous, and I think so much of that is this dance and, the drama triangle, right? Um, yeah, shame and protectors.
Yeah. And the tragedy, as we said before, is we're doing that to ourselves all the time. We're
Yeah,
collapsing our own
yeah,
deep, complex experience
yeah,
internally and making ourselves the bad one.
yeah. And a lot of the conflict is the external thing bringing up the thing inside of me, right? It's like when
Yeah,
someone is like, "You know what? Why are you making me feel this way or making me feel guilty?"
yeah. Yeah, we can think of the shame triangle like psychological autoimmunity.
Mhm.
Yeah, where it's not an actual virus or illness that our immune system needs to effectively
Yeah,
fight or
or
relate to, but
metabolize. Yeah,
it becomes an autoimmune psychological reaction inside.
yeah. Well, I'm really excited for you all to bring this book into the world. As you mentioned before we hit record, yeah, it just came out last week. So when this releases, it'll be about 2 weeks ago that it was released. But yeah, anything else for now that you feel like is missing from this conversation? And then, of course, like, yeah, how can people learn more and get their hands on the book?
Yeah, I think just to give people the teaser of what the transformation is. And so each of these parts transforms. So the inner critic transforms into an inner coach. We let people, you can name your own, but where it's still a part of us that is holding us to standards, but it's doing so with encouragement and support instead of us beating us down. So it's actually a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. Our escaper parts, and in their many varieties, instead of they're ultimately turning away from ourself. They're turning away from the feelings and experience of shame or our wounded parts. And so our escapers transform into an inner nurture that is turning towards instead. And then shame doesn't necessarily transform into another part. We distinguish it as just becoming our raw experience of what is without the story of shame laid on top of it.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else, David, on your end that you wanted to toss in?
Yeah, I think just that, is really knowing that there's something practical on the other side, that it's not just the swirl of being
Yeah.
stuck in the shame triangle, and that this is really a powerful work that we've seen be extremely transformative in the lives of clients. It's been so interesting to apply this work and to see people rapidly start to experience their internal relationship differently. I mean, it's kind of an audacious claim in some ways that our inner voice can be different, and that we can actually be our best ally instead of our worst enemy. And so I'm,
Mhm.
I'm really excited to share this book with people, a larger audience.
Well, I'm kind of shocked that I know people like Martha Sweezy has done a lot around shame, and shame and IFS, but like I'm kind of shocked that it isn't a bigger part of the global conversation, even the conversation among like coaches, helpers, therapists, because again, it's just so incredibly insidious and central to what we do. And when you start kind of listening for shame and parts that hold shame, like you just hear it absolutely everywhere. Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of times clients come in because they're in conflict with someone, right? With themselves, with others, right? And not thinking about and working with shame is like missing kind of the whole thing. So, I guess part of it is, like, people, don't even wanna talk about it to an extent because it can be shameful to talk about shame, but,
Right.
we're doing something about it today on this podcast. So,
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people can find the book all the places you can find books in terms of, online and yeah. And our website, my website is jessicafern.com.
Yeah. Mine is restorativerelationship.com.
excellent. We'll put links to everything in the show notes and description. Thank you both for being here and for your contribution. I'm really excited, like I said, for this book to get out there into the world, and certainly will be recommending it to clients and practitioners alike. So, thank you all again, and
Mhm.
yeah, keep in touch and best of luck with the new book.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks so much
you.
for having us.
You're so welcome. Keep in
Yeah.
touch.
All right.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clark Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. See you next time.